Welcome back to Raised by Giants live discussion. Welcome everyone in the chat. Good to see you guys and any moderators out there and or channel members. Today we have returning guest Andy Rouse from the Deep Share here with us to talk about what he believes is going on with the community and this merging of the mainstream with conspiracy and truther communities. But before I bring him on, sign up to be a Ryder Ranger channel member. It's really the best way to help support the show monthly for less than a cup of coffee. And if you become a Ryder Ranger channel member, you get access to bonus episodes. And a new episode is going to drop tomorrow, Friday, June 21st. So click the join button beside the name of the channel under the video and become a Ryder Ranger channel member. It's also pinned to the top of the comments in the live chat and help support the show monthly and get access to those bonus episodes. So with that down, joining us today, Andy Rouse from the Deep Share podcast. How's it going, Andy? It's good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, great to be here, man. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you had a little hiatus from the podcasting world, which I completely understand, bro. Shit gets so overwhelming at times. If you don't have the excitement behind it anymore, or then you lack the motivation to do it, right? It becomes less and less. But I'm excited that you're here. We got a lot to talk about, and it seems like we're really seeing this merging of the alternative community with mainstream media, and a lot of things are getting wrapped up into that amazing conspiracy burrito, and some are happy about it and others are kind of like, what's going on? You know, some see it as like a declaration that they've been right the entire time. And everything they've been talking about is right, which couldn't be further from the truth. What do you see is going on here?
Well, I mean, everything you said, I would agree with for sure. I've been researching for the past couple of years into kind of the roots of the world we see today from many different angles, you know, and what I keep coming back to, it's kind of hard to ignore, but we do quite often, is how the counterculture itself in this country came to be, really. And it was all manufactured when you look into it. And when you have that kind of hanging in the backdrop at all times, where there's really no gap. I mean, you can research every decade and there's something to be said about control of both sides, you know, the mainstream and the alternative or counterculture, whatever you'd want to call it. It's kind of been a double-edged sword for as long as we can look back into. And it's really troubling when you have that constantly in the background of your mind while trying to not necessarily trust or not trust certain individuals. It's more about the content and the narratives being woven on one side or the other. The more I spend time in this kind of counterculture, I guess you could say it, the more it resembles the mainstream anyway, where massive, large assumptions held by large groups will rise to the top regardless of the, you know, validity or the focus on detail that the narrative has. It's, you know, we are in the world of we are awake. We want to know the truth. We question everything now, and everything we grew up with was a lie. So it can't be anything close to what we grew up with. It has to be basically the total opposite. And that it's just, yeah, that's a big problem.
Yeah, I've been saying for a long time now that this community, not specifically my community or my listeners or the people that are listening to the show right now, but the community as a whole in general, the conspiracy community, the alternative community, the what you're calling this counterculture type of community is just the mainstream media for a different group of people that don't buy into the official narrative. And it's important what you bring up there is, if you don't have all the puzzle pieces to the puzzle, the best you can do is come to an educated guess, right? It's like trying someone in the court of law with nothing but eyewitness testimony. It's very difficult to do. And many lawyers won't even take it to trial or take it to court because there's no evidence. And that's what a lot of the community is based upon, is zero evidence. They don't have all the pieces to the puzzle, so therefore they can't see the full picture and end up
Right.
connecting dots that aren't there, or forcing things to fit where they don't fit. That's really
Yeah, and I would
conspiracy theories
also
work.
I would also say that there's a lot of things out there that are definitely made to look like they fit. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the whole point. If the counterculture is controlled, then it's got to be efficiently controlled, right? They can't just sell us on shit we don't already want and need and feel we lack. And so they do that to the mainstream, but they do that to the alternative side as well.
Well, yeah, when you look back at the entire UFO narrative and Paul Benowitz and all that stuff that came up out of the Paul Benowitz case, is the exact same things that are being regurgitated within this community when it comes to extraterrestrials and UFOs and alien involvement. It's the same thing, and Richard Doty has stated on record several times that he was in charge of the disinformation, misinformation directly to the UFO community. He
Yeah,
was giving them fake documents, fake things that were not real, to
right.
confuse people, to make them believe what they wanted them to believe. And if you, that's just one section of the community. That's just ufology. Now you're telling me that that didn't happen with everything else? You're telling me that none of this other stuff is was also done the exact same way?
And I know we've talked about this before. Along all those different genres and topics that we could get into, I absolutely don't think the mainstream narrative is accurate either. I'm not defending that by any means, but um, because there is some sort of precious truth that could spill out. I think there's a lot of safeguards in place. I mean, that's how serious it seems to be if there is some sort of actual conspiracy that's been going on for generations. If that is true, if that is possible, then there's so many safeguards we can't even imagine. And the main reason why we can't imagine is because we really don't know the motive. We can say it's greed and money, but we're describing a group that would be beyond the need for those feelings. Like greed would almost be rooted out entirely because of their abundance, right? All those basic human ideas that we latch onto this gigantic secret power, it just falls apart because it's just very much like how we all would react to things, not the way these people of massive privilege would.
Well, if you were to relate that back to, you know, medieval times and like kings and queens, why were they putting out distractions? Why were they building these coliseums for people to fight each other and kill each other, and basically creating a sport that is verbatim exactly what we do today with football stadiums, baseball stadiums, soccer stadiums, and all that?
Mm,
It serves as like a distraction, because if there's not a distraction and people don't have their mind occupied on something else, then they come in and overthrow them.
right,
They
exactly.
overthrow the king. They overthrow the queen. Idle hands are the devil's playground, right? And that also gets into, I was just talking to Trey Hudson the other day, and we were talking about this, utopian reality. And I really don't think that we can ever get to a utopian reality, because there's always going to be somebody that comes in that wants to screw everything up for everyone. When people are bored, when people are tired of doing the same thing over and over again, even if everything is wonderful and beautiful and everyone's taken care of and everyone's equal and all this golden age of humanity, eventually someone at some point is going to want to instill chaos.
Yeah, perhaps chaos, or even just, you can take it down a notch and call it that's could be selfish desires as well. The ego comes into it no matter what you do. Like absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that kind of starts with the meeting one's desires, whether they deserve them or not. The causing chaos is definitely thinking more globally for sure. I think that comes next. That's like the next phase out. I've been really focused on how these people, quote unquote, this group would have gotten to this place, cognitively over time, and it seems like it is the group that must have reacted to some major global trauma that we all experienced in a much harsher way than the rest of us or something. If it wasn't some group of quote unquote gods surviving the flood and all that, it seems like damage done psychologically, causes the haves and the have nots. And yeah, global chaos, catastrophe, and things like that. I really do believe there's, as we've talked about before, there's always a very down to earth human explanation for why things are going on the way they are, and why this supposed possible cabal might be the way they are. Of course, people point to reptilian, and they're not human. They can't be human. It's too hard to think of them as human, maybe because of the idea of them having absolute power for this long, or being this cold and anti-human. Who knows? But it goes back to not having the real motive. We just make guesses. And again, there's a lot of things in place for us to snatch up and go, ooh, this one sounds right.
Yeah. And then, when you don't have all the information, like what you're saying, you don't really have the motive. We can only theorize and have a speculatory conversation about what that motive is. But it seems like if you were to try and put yourself in their shoes, it would seem like that they're either doing this for fun, that they're just kind of messing with people. I mean, think about it. If you legitimately ran the world, like, you would want to have fun doing it, right?
Perhaps.
That's probably what I would do.
I still
try and
feel
have
like
fun.
it's more of a situation where crimes are being covered up, and a lot of the stuff that you and I specifically get into, we're talking about basically narratives that obfuscate real human beings, real bloodlines, perhaps, of doing things in the past and carrying on legacies into the present and the future. That would be one hell of a possible motive for not wanting, these things to get out. Another way to keep us down and dumb and all this, to purposely forget our history and keep us where we are. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and when you think about it, is like, how long is this technology and this stuff going to last? I mean, the things that we were using 2 decades ago are no longer relevant.
Right. The
It's easy.
UFOs of the 60s are long gone.
Yeah, they're no longer a thing anymore. They're not disc, which they never were disc. They never were saucers. That was a misquote and a misidentification by the publicist that published Kenneth Arnold's story in 1947. So it's when you track back a lot of the stuff, and again, when you don't have all the information, you're forced to create the information and relate it to other bits of information that may or may not be connected. This is really, I see it as a plot of destabilization.
Oh, yeah.
If you confuse the public on what it is that they're supposed to believe, then none of them will ever come together and agree upon anything. And that's right where these manipulators want us. And I guarantee you, Andy, that they all sit back and they just laugh. They let these things happen because it serves their best interest to let it continue.
Oh, absolutely. And when I bring up, ancient history and their, this group's possible connection to it, that can exist simultaneously while not alongside this other motive that's more modern, that's more personal, less attached to the past. At this point, if there's bloodlines running the world, I'm pretty sure 90% of those families don't know they're running the world in that way anyway. They know that they're probably in charge of policy, or they sway the market here and there, but like a lot of them probably don't understand their lineage, if it is true, if it does go back as far as they claim, some of them anyway. But yeah, and the one thing that to what you were saying before, a destabilization tactic, the most important thing to harness us with is our big questions: where we come from, where are we going, what are we here for, who are we? Those questions, I don't know if it's true or not, but the way I look at it is religion was that a long time ago, and now We've kind of moved. We're into this era where religion doesn't cut it for the vast majority, at least not the way it used to. But both methods work perfectly. It's the same thing when you can step back. Like, honestly, let's use the hypothetical of aliens coming here, real aliens coming here. I think they would make some interesting observations about our beliefs. And I don't think they would make many distinctions between Jesus, the New Age, the Old Age, aliens, interdimensional demons, jinn, fairies, elves. They would take in all of this content, and one side of it would be, okay, this is very much allegory for conscious experiences going on. And the idea of entities, in my opinion, especially when it comes to psychedelics or meditation or anything like that, those are unrealized aspects of the subconscious. And I've always felt that way, just from my own personal experiences, but also having it verified so thoroughly by Eastern mysticism that most of the New Age just rips to shreds and picks out the fun parts. You know, it doesn't talk about the dissolution of self and all that. Yeah, I'm kind of getting off track here, but yeah.
No, that makes 100% sense. And I've always really felt that way too, that when people say that they contact, especially on some kind of hallucinogenic or some kind of drug, they're actually just going within their own subconscious, and those entities are manifesting within them because they are a part of you.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gets into, the types of programming that we have of what these entities may or may not look like. Our mind could be creating them depending on the times that we're in.
We also have like a very small percentage of the population on talk shows of all kinds, way bigger than ours, basically framing this and giving people the shapes they want to sell and the words they want to sell. We got the blue aliens, the blue avians, all these kinds of things that are like, again, they're becoming these big dumb narratives that are acting as like flags being planted in the ground, as if we've figured this part of it out. When it comes to the UFO community, yeah, they latch onto this stuff as if it's basically fact at this point. I think if most of them would hear some crazy stories from ufology, they may disregard a few of them, but in the back of their mind, they're going, well, I know there's definitely at least like 20 species out there. They have a baseline belief system going on now. And yeah, relating it back to the community at large, yeah, conspiracy theorists do too. You say the Nephilim, there's one story in mind, right? I mean, how many different stories? When you see any viral video pop up about Nephilim, you know exactly what they're about to say. They're going to talk about giants. They're going to talk about interdimensional creatures like coming in like succubi and raping human women. They're going to talk about these big fantastical stories, and that's the only narrative you get. Meanwhile, there's rich anthropological data from hundreds of years ago talking about these same stories without any sort of supernatural or extraterrestrial context whatsoever. From England and Ireland to the Persian Gulf to the Far East, all of our mythological anything has human roots to it first. So with that, even as just a theory, the fact that we barely look at that at all in this community is extremely upsetting. Because, I mean, we don't have to always rely on Occam's razor and, the simplest answer is always the right one. A lot of times it is, though. And to disregard humans in these situations, even evil ones that may want to be covering themselves up one way or the other, it's still distracting from the absolute core, which is us. And that's literally the center of any conspiracy. Oh, they're distracting us from our power, from our own self-worth. Well, this would be the big tamale, in my opinion.
I agree. And I think that comes from this thought and idea that people don't want to believe that we're the only beings in the universe.
It goes back to that lack of responsibility. We are an infantilized species. Yeah.
So therefore, anything that can't be directly tied to human involvement, they've put the stamp of extraterrestrials. Well, we don't know how the Great Pyramids were built. No one can build it now, so it had to have been extraterrestrials, right?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
That's done in many different ways. They do that literally all the time. I mean, that's what the whole thing. But the community is kind of shifting, especially when it comes to ufology, which I've been calling this for a really long time, because people are tired of the I think they're really getting tired of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, because one, there's no evidence, there's no proof for it. We don't have any. No one's ever met a physical alien that you can walk out and shake their hand. It's never happened before, ever. So, and I think people are starting to realize that this isn't true. So now they have to kind of turn it into something that has been talked about before, but hasn't put a lot of credence into, which is the crypto-terrestrial theory, that they're from here, they've always been here, they live here, they're beneath the oceans, they're in some mountain in Peru or wherever in the forestry areas, and they have these bases and they live here.
Yeah, have you seen that new clip of the native tribes being told the word alien for the first time, but then they see pictures of like depictions of grays and they're like, oh, we know them. Oh yeah, that's from our mythology. And oh, they're from underground and everything. And I'm like, how much you pay these guys? But also it doesn't even matter, because that's what they've been hearing from their ancestors for hundreds of years and thousands of years. So be it. Again, like, we're getting closer and closer. As you say, it's falling apart. The narrative's falling apart. And which direction is it going? It's going more and more towards humans. And the thing is, I think it's not to try to turn the conversation too much, but we have a problem with our skeptics out there too, especially our bigger ones making more noise and getting more attention, because they think nothing's going on. You know, they don't look into history like we do. They don't care about that. They, unfortunately, a lot of them just care about clicks, just like anybody else. They want those, you know, the opposite. They don't want the believers. They want the skeptics all following them and just saying everything in the sky is bokeh. None of it's real. These are the same people that would, a lot of them would talk to us like we're crazy because we didn't get vaccinated, or we're crazy because we think JFK got us, whatever. These are the same people that don't consider themselves skeptics towards power or authority by any means. They literally abide by the social expert to a T, just like the mainstream once again. And we have that element in there too. The Mick Wests of the world, you know, and all of his copycats on Twitter, you know, they make good points and they help us with this one topic, but outside of that purview, they're very, very limited. So they're not going to be very open-minded when it really counts. I don't know, man. I see this kind of just picking up and just gaining ground. And now maybe there's more critical thinking people than I think there are out there, and I'm being, you know, too dismissive. But with Billy Carson just going on Rogan, as I was predicting back in February and before that would inevitably happen, someone would have to be on Rogan sooner or later to really tie in those catchy things about Sitchin and the Anunnaki and our ancient past. Because as I've been saying for a long time, the modern disclosure and the ancient alien shit is absolutely colliding on purpose. It's not just the whack jobs talking about paper mache mummies in Congress. These are the same guys that will absolutely not only entertain, but push these ancient alien ideas. Now, with what I study about history, I'm not looking at ancient mythology like, whoa, there used to be fucking monsters everywhere. These are allegories for human cultures that have been covered up by the same people that gave us gods. We're getting aliens by the same people that turned, you know, words like dragon and elf and fairy into magical little creatures, but they previously meant humans. These are the same people that are giving us aliens and interdimensional beings, and now crypto-terrestrials, where they're aliens, but they're disguised as humans. Oh, no, they look just like us, and you couldn't tell. Most of them are tall and blonde. they're all aliens though. They're just pretending to be human. Like it's getting real close, and there's really not much of a way out of it at one point or another.
Well, that's the next logical step when everything starts to fall apart because you can't verify that any of these entities really are aliens if they look identically like us. And
Exactly.
there has been there's been like a weird thing where a lot of this stuff wasn't accepted for a really long time, and then all of a sudden the floodgates just kind of opened up, and then all of a sudden it became accepted now.
Yeah, I blame Joe Rogan.
Well, it's I don't know. I have a different thought and a different opinion on on Joe Rogan. Here's the deal, right? You're only allowed to have dissenting opinions on any given topic if no one listens to you. Otherwise, you kind of have to toe the line. And there was a point where Rogan was really afraid, and that was during COVID. And you could tell he was scared. When he moved from LA to Texas, one of those first episodes I remember him doing, he had this guy on that was talking about how the new financial system was going to work and how this social credit score system was going to work. And Rogan didn't want to have anything to do with it, right? He just talking about cars and stuff the entire time. And at one point the guest was like, man, Rogan, you obviously don't want to talk about this. Maybe we can, pick back up on this later. But I really do think he did something to really piss people off, right? And probably that was a move to Texas. That was probably the first straw, breaking away from LA and where everyone was. And then that breakaway from YouTube, right, was the next thing. And then all the other stuff that followed behind that I'm not going to get into because of nonsense. But in a way, he won, but he won silently, right? And he's back on YouTube. Now, there may be a few reasons for this. Either YouTube realized that the numbers weren't up and far less people were watching and listening. Now, I don't mind Rogan. I actually like him. And without Rogan paving the way, none of us would really be here, right? He pretty much started the entire podcasting world and deserves credit regardless if you like him or not. Yeah. And if you were the one that pretty much started something, you would expect to be at the top. I'm sure I would. If I started podcasting, I would expect to be right up there. I would expect to have gotten that giant Spotify deal of $10 million or whatever it is that got. And that's the goal, right? The goal of doing this kind of work on one hand is to expand and to have more and more people listening to you. On the other hand is to also also have integrity and have honor with the things that you're talking about and trying to bring on good guests to have a really good conversation with. So
I think, I would totally agree with you on all of that too. I really, I think there's a lot more useful idiots out there or scared, compromised people than bad guys rubbing their fingers together and cackling. I think controlled opposition is a very loaded term. We use it a lot. I use it a lot. But, when we say paving the way, sure, podcasting is great and all that. It depends on what scale you're looking at it, right? I mean, this alternative, the advertisements for the episode, right? We could call it like an alternative religious cult. And if it is that, someone had to pave the way for it. And someone had to be that good guy. And I do think Rogan's a pretty good guy. He seems like a good family guy. Who knows? Maybe not. Maybe he's pure evil behind the scenes. But we'll never know. That's another thing. We have all these guesses, right? But what I do know is what has happened because of him and what he is either purposely or unintentionally doing. Watching not only Billy Carson recently, but even years ago when we were talking about how all of a sudden this got popular, this became a big topic. It's when Bob Lazar and Jeremy the Hair Corbell was on his show in 2016. I mean, that was the earliest thing. And I remember Bob Lazar from when I was younger and going, holy shit, he's on Rogan now. And this was, I was so into the UFO topic at the time, innocently, that I was really excited about that. And then he started tying it into Ancient Aliens right in that episode too. Bob says one of the craft may have been from an archaeological dig. And it was like, ooh, that's just the little taste that they had to drop in 2016. But look at where that's progressed to. It's
And
so
that was
massive.
kind of a throwaway line too, but I really recognize that. I because that's where it's kind of heading, and the crash retrieval stuff is a double-edged sword, right? See, people think that a crash retrieval means that it happened in modern times, or someone's seen the craft fall out of the sky and then they saw it on radar and then they went to where it was, or a different country called them to go and figure out where this craft is and then take it back to the United States to reverse engineer it and all that. Well, that doesn't
Right.
have to be the case. It could literally be an archaeological find. That would still be considered a crash retrieval. Doesn't matter how
Absolutely.
much time has passed in between the craft crashing and you finding the craft. It's still a crash retrieval. But really quickly, Galactic Federation of Light, thank you for your generosity and sending in that $2 super chat. Appreciate you a lot, and love the name Galactic Federation of Light. Ha 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 ha. But I'll
Galactic
take it.
Federation of Light. Yeah, the of light really makes a difference.
It
'Cause the
does. What
Galactic
happened to the
Federation,
regular? What happened to the regular Galactic Federation, dude?
they just don't exist. It's some version of Space Force that never probably took off. But man, we could go in so many different directions with this topic too, because it really does connect to the whole picture of what's going on. But then there's so many different little pieces. And, growing up, I had friends that were never part of the same group of friends. I had a lot of different personalities floating around. And it seems I had the same interests outwards in the world. And I look at the psychedelic groups. I look at all the people obsessed with consciousness, and, that leaks into neuroscience and quantum physics, like all these different fields of interest, all linked together in one way or the other. And when I started to really reconsider the alien idea, not only in modern times, but mostly in the ancient world, when I really felt like that was a psyop of some sort, I never knew what it was a psyop for. I used to watch Ancient Aliens, and I'd remove the aliens part when they would talk about it, like remove the conclusion, and I'd go, man, did mushrooms do this to us? Like, did that, just like Terrence McKenna talks about, did it accelerate our evolution or something? Are mushrooms from outer space? I would try to input some other method of this, or some other reason for it than aliens. And eventually I came around to the idea that it was probably just humans being talked about or whatever. But the all these different factions of thought exist today in this alternative world, and we're all kind of being culled towards the same pen, whether you're into Judeo-Christianity, or you're into Eastern mysticism, or New Age, or occultism, witchcraft, all of it, or aliens. None of it doesn't matter which topic you're into. It seems like all the dogs are corralling us towards the same pen. You look at interviews like Tucker Carlson on Rogan, it's just the perfect symmetry of, oh yeah, these angelic, demonic aliens. It's spiritual in nature, obviously. And it's being presented as fact just as much as anything else in this community. It's being presented as, well, I know a guy that knows things and knows people, and this is what I found out from him. And that's exactly how Tucker presents it. It's how so many people in this industry present these things. And it's just, yeah, it's really upsetting.
Yeah, the overlap between religious, for the lack of a better word, propaganda when it surrounds these type of things, and the community, because they have to be able to explain some of this stuff from a church perspective, just like the Vatican coming out with that document on the apparitions document here recently, and the paranormal and the rules and the guidelines of actually identifying if a phenomenon is of a religious nature or not. That's to wrap in some sort of new generation of people, because religion has really been going downhill. The churches have not been filling up as much as they were previously. And
Yeah.
they have to try and capture some of those people. And the UFO and the alien topic is really big at the moment. So the best way to do that is saying, oh, well, the Pope said that if an extraterrestrial lands, that he would baptize the alien.
Right. They got to tie them in. They have to tie in every group. And it seems like it's working. I mean, you talk to psychedelic people, they think that they're very open to the UAP idea and all this disclosure going on, even if their heads aren't in it. You know, they're doing other things. They're more interested in consciousness, but that's where they're linking it, because that's what people like Lou Elizondo are doing when they give these impassioned speeches to their followers. Mainstream catches on. Everybody catches on to these little topics. And listening to that guy talk about, we're going to have to reanalyze our whole lives and, you know, figure out what everything means to us again. All that kind of talk is going to turn those kind of open-minded people on. They'll go, wait, whoa, oh my God, maybe McKenna was right. Like, even if he was an FBI informant.
Well, and a lot of the stories and thoughts and ideas and theories that we have around extraterrestrials is nothing new. I mean, it's the same thing that's been regurgitated for a really long time. Like I was talking about with the New Age community and the cult of I Am in the early 30s with Guy and Edna Ballard. Pretty much everything from the New Age community that is being popularized today came from that cult.
Mm-hmm.
The names have just changed and turned into something different. And then you get into Charles Fort from the early 20s and then into the late 20s. Everything that he was saying and all the thoughts and ideas and theories that he had about what extraterrestrials, he was one of the first people that started talking about that thought and idea that they were among us, that they were already here, you know. And then you have like people like Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp and these other people that are just regurgitating those same thoughts and those same opinions. It's all been done before, but when things start getting exposed and there's no proof and no evidence behind one of these thoughts and theories, they just switch on to the next. And I guarantee you that if we're still here in 10 to 20 years and we're still doing this type of show, it'll have bounced back the other direction.
Perhaps, yeah. I'm very curious to see how this pans out, whether it gets bigger and more addicting and, you know, more brainwashing or less. You know, it's confounding because it touches so many different aspects of this community. You know, I get into like the more mythological and folklore side of things in ancient history, and it's all linked up with this Anunnaki from the Persian Gulf. You know, wherever you go in the world, of course, you have these interconnected cultures that may have existed all around the world. And again, people refuse to accept that it could be humans that were there doing it. It has to be something better than us. And I think that's the biggest problem with it, is that it's always, whether it's gods or aliens, it always has to be something bigger, and it has to be some sort of person. And when we tie it to the phenomenon of consciousness and the real mysteries of reality and self and all these different things that even mystics from thousands of years ago were only able to use metaphors to describe, and now we're putting very physical, material names and ideologies around them, and it's very it's hard not to look at it other than a massive psyop against, I don't know. I guess you could, in my wildest ideas, it's like the secret societies maybe do know something more than that we think they do, or something like that, and they are keeping the lid on something massive, but I don't know what exactly.
Well, people really got into this community, especially the New Agers and the spiritualist, started drifting outside of religion because they were disillusioned with religion.
Yeah.
Now, what happens to those same people when they get disillusioned with the new age.
They seem to be all being enticed to go back the other way. My favorite point to make, and I've been saying it for like a good year and a half, and now it's just like whack-a-mole. They're everywhere. Every celebrity that comes out as red-pilled basically has to be Christian. There's almost zero celebrities, A-list, B-list, whatever you want to call it, that are fighting the man and talking all the stuff that we're talking that are not diehard Christians, either always or now suddenly. Fucking Rob Schneider, he just got baptized or whatever. He became Catholic. Russell Brand, that guy. People don't realize they're just kind of pulling different parts of the culture towards this center in every way they can. And I'm not saying these people are, maybe they're enticed, maybe they're paid. I don't know what the deal is, but it's hard not to look at it as a massive conspiracy because it looks as though it's all one massive moving part. You know, you got the new age covered, you've got the religious side covered, and this alien question really centers it all. I mean, we have this new church being built somewhere in the world, right? Or it's already been built to merge all the religions together, at least the Western religions. Yeah, it's got one world government written all over it. It's got this alien narrative written all over it. I don't know. It's so obvious when you really look at it.
Yeah, that's the one world religion that everyone's been talking about. And if you watch that new Exorcist movie, that's pretty much how it went. They brought priests and all these different people from all the other different religions and to all come together to exorcise this girl that was possessed.
And it goes all the way back to that show Lost. I loved Lost. I watched that all the way through, man. It was such a fun, edge of your seat thriller type show. And at the very end of it all, they are all together in this massive cathedral with like every sacred symbol from all around the world, all presented right there as some sort of beyond life situation. And that's great. I think, again, the bad guys can only manipulate and get us with things that are at the roots true. You know, yes, we are all one, I think. You know, there is this beautiful unity among all of us, and you can look at physics for it. You can look in a lot of different directions to see that and understand it over time. But they are absolutely taking advantage of all those concepts and using them against us in as many ways as possible.
That's right. And what you're saying is that, because it was like what you were mentioning earlier with a lot of the debunkers and the people that say like, oh, you know, none of it's real, it's all nonsense, it's all garbage. And that's not the angle to take either. There are some woo-woo things that are very real, you know, like, dude, I 100% believe in the paranormal. 100%. It happens. I've experienced it, and I just don't mess with it. I just don't
That's
go near
fair.
it. I don't go into any haunted locations. I don't do any of that anymore.
It's funny because I've always gone head first into that shit my whole life, and I never, well, I'm not saying never, but like at least when I'm in that mode, I've never experienced anything. It's probably because it requires a certain level of vulnerability in the moment for these things to happen. But you know, I don't disagree with the paranormal. I just have a weird perspective on it. You know, like,
Well,
I mean,
it's more psychological. It's a psychological thing. It's not even so much a
entities out there.
It's not. It's psychological.
Good.
It's psychological manipulation. Like whatever that is gets into your head and makes you believe that you're seeing things or things are moving or make you hear things. That's from you know, my experience with it. People are looking at it wrong when it comes to like there's something outside of you. No, it's not outside of you. It's exactly like what we were talking about earlier with the you know, taking the drugs and meeting these entities and all that stuff. You know, that's happening within you. That's happening within your mind. And that's what paranormal to me is happening within your head.
Yeah, I like that definition. And I may have said it on your show. I've quoted it a couple times, but that line from Harry Potter where Harry asked Dumbledore if it's all happening in his head or not. And he's like, just because it's happening in your head doesn't mean it isn't real. He's like, of course it's all happening in your head, but that doesn't mean it isn't real. And I think, and this is, all of us are victim to this, and none of us are going to be privy to it until we're dead, if that. But in my view, yeah, we're not seeing reality as it is. And I don't just mean blue is a different blue, or you're a 60-foot dragon in real life. You know what I mean? Like you're not, or you're an interdimensional spirit being in reality, and you're like probably 100 feet tall. You listen to Dolores Cannon and all these different people that just know the spirit world so well and have all the answers. And it's very frustrating when you're just talking about fucking archetypes, and you're making people think these are actual things that you're talking about and not constructs. And when you take the individual and then you look at it fractally and you listen to physics saying that all of reality is basically that same construct, it gets to be more that consciousness is some sort of phenomenon itself. It's all the phenomenon. Everything we look at and touch and feel and see and think about is part of that phenomenon. And I think some elevated people have started to call that God. That's comfortable. I don't mind that. I doubt there's even a personality behind it, though, other than your own at the end there. And this, what I'm talking about now, if Christians hear it, it sounds satanic. But that's the problem, because these Satanists, or whatever you want to call these people, that kind of get this mentality, but they get it wrong. And they think there's 8 billion gods walking around this planet, all just exacting our own will onto the people below or whatever. But that's not how it is. It's not that these gross material personalities are all gods. It's almost more as though the I in you and the I in others and the I in me is the same I. And it's all it's looking through reality through what do you call it when you look through that little crystal and you see it in like 9 million different directions. I don't know. And that's as woo-woo as I get.
A kaleidoscope, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Your prism. Yeah. That's what it is. You send light through a prism, and yeah, that may sound woo-woo, and that's totally fine. I'm comfortable with my own woo-woo. I've experienced it myself, and then for the first time in my entire life became obsessed with every ancient culture there was, because they all talk about it. At some point or another, all forms of spirituality seem to root back to this idea of one consciousness. It's just dressed up as you get closer and closer to modern times, where those texts become more popular and more put together and constructed. We have all these allegories and stories built around them, but it's in every culture. And so I think if hypothetically that was what was being obfuscated, it would make sense of almost every other psyop.
Well, our eyes and ears take on electrical signals, which our brain interprets based off of our expectation. Mm-hmm. And our expectation is based off of our experience, our experience of life, meaning that we don't really see reality. We see our perception. Reality based off of our experiences and expectations.
That's right.
So technically, everyone is living their own little reality, and that gets to where people don't really believe in the oneness concept, that we're all one, because they can't boggle the idea that we're all connected when we're all living these separate lives, and we've all lived different. We've all had different experiences of our lives.
So paradox.
How could we all be the same? Yeah.
The only way to do it is to let go. The same way that all the meditative teachings talk to people about, saying you have to learn to let go of your ego. And not as if ego is some specific real actual thing, but letting go of your inner child, basically, your selfishness, all these qualities that are more aimed at the self rather than outward towards others. I liked what Ram Dass said, and he may be controlled opposition too, but I liked when he said, treat everyone as God in drag. Because that's kind of, and when you start to do that, it feels really good. You don't always get the greatest responses, but to treat people that way is rewarding in the end. And I think, I don't know where I think I was wandering off there.
I think that not only treat people as God and drag, as like what you just mentioned, but I think treat everyone as a reflection of yourself.
Bingo. And I think that's kind of the same thing. Again, I'm not God, you're not God, we are God. That's a concept that gets tossed out by religious people because they think we're talking about this idolatry of the self, basically, and it's not. But that's what it's usually presented as by the Anton LaVeys and the Crowleys of the world, who wanted will and power. That is the opposite of godliness. Absolutely. It's a coincidence that it's against Christianity, but it really is evil. It's the wrong way to look at things. But there's a silver lining there, and that oneness is overlooked big time, and it's taken advantage of. And yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole thing with calling yourself a god or us as a god is taken wrongly. It's taken as an excuse to be able to do whatever you want or say whatever
Yeah,
you
and have
want
my
or treat
truth versus your truth. Yeah.
exactly
Oh, it's
or
poison.
treat people however you want to treat them with no consequences. But that's not what we're saying here, folks. And when you understand it and you come to the conclusion of what we're really meaning, it makes sense.
And
Makes a lot more.
reality gets more exciting and more loving and more amazing when you take on this perspective. Even like all my experiences talking to near-death experiencers, and I related so closely to a lot of their stories because for whatever reason, through heavy doses of psychedelics, the people I could relate to more than anything were the near-death experiencers, which really tells us something, right? Are they really seeing something outside of their own consciousness? And I'm not deflating anyone's amazing encounters, but this goes back to what I was saying, how on every single level, the quote unquote bad guys are taking us away from ourselves and humanity on the individual level and the whole level. Because even in that realm, you can't accept that it's parts of you. You can't. I mean, I came face to face with it and it was just, it's mind blowing. It's speechless. You can't. Yeah, it's the most humbling experience of your whole life. But it's misunderstood drastically because we've been taught that if anything phenomenal happens, it can't be you. It can't be us. It has to be something outside of us. And that's how we've always been taught to look.
It has to be God. It has to be aliens. It has to be something spectacular. It has to be something super mythological that no one ever sees or no one ever hears.
Yeah, not anymore. Nephilim are long gone now,
That talking snake in the garden's gone, bro. It's no longer here. It went into a different dimension.
I mean, the funny part is this psyop does so many different things. Like I've said it before, it just does so many different things. Because even if you look at stories like the Nephilim or other religious stories, and you start looking at them as like legends of humanity, it tells such not only incredible stories, but pretty damning stories too about major groups and areas of the world, like what happened, and like it just changes the perspective completely and it enriches our past so much more. You can do that while still saying who knows, but at least you're remaining within the idea that this was probably humanity, which is a lot closer to the ground than, well, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was aliens, maybe it was this, maybe it was this stuff we've never seen or been able to prove, or stuff that we saw within our own consciousness, but we can't accept that, so it has to be out there. I tend to think that looking at it as human history could be extremely fulfilling, but it's the least popular anywhere. The mainstream media or the mainstream historians look at all of mythology and religion for the most part as just whimsical stories by primitive people. And I don't think that's changed much in the last 50 to 100 years. That's basically the educational academic view of ancient culture for the most part when it comes to the mythology side. But then you look at the alternative communities and all you get is monsters, physical, real monsters that they have been groomed with from Hollywood over the past 100 years. So both the mainstream and the alternative communities are totally fucked when it comes to looking at our history in any meaningful way, in my opinion. Any meaningful way that's going to bring meaning to us as humanity. Unless you're looking at it like we fucking overcame all these aliens or something. But it's just a stretch. It's such a stretch to do that instead of just accepting that these are our stories. You know, maybe there was a progenitor race of people that had more advantage over others, and they could have been shepherds at times. They probably could have been fucking tyrants at times. But it sounds to me, from many different perspectives around the world, these were people. And the implications of that are massive.
Yeah, what does that mean? What does that mean to our culture now? And how many times throughout history have we been in a very similar position? There was this document that coincidentally that Joe Rogan brought up on his channel, well, on his podcast. That's like an ancient document that is literally talking about the same types of things that we're talking about that's happening right now, where this person that wrote this ancient text is saying that it's the end of the world, that people aren't obeying, that people are, that everything's corrupt. It's like, how many times have we been through this exact same thing several times, and nothing really ever happens? I mean, it could be a possibility that a natural disaster happened, or we did end up imploding ourselves, or some kind of world-ending flood, or some kind of massive disaster happened that wiped out a lot of people. I mean, that is still a possibility. But then when you think like, and I don't mean to the same point as like we are right now, but because I think it's possible that we are the only civilization that is used the technology in this type of way. Like, yeah, there may have been other advanced civilizations before in the past, but that doesn't mean that they followed the same direction that we went with our technology, with our phones and with our computers and with planes. And they could be advanced in other ways. They could be more consciously advanced. They could be more spiritually advanced. They could be more mentally advanced than we are. And that's a common thing that people, whenever they're referring to ancient civilizations, they're taking into account that they were advanced like we think that we are advanced, when that's more than likely not the case. They were advanced in a different kind of way, not the way that we think that we are now. It's a completely separate type of advanced. And then it's just interesting to think, well, how many times have we been on this precipice, and for how many thousands of years have people thought that this was going to be the end?
Right.
It's all going to be over. We're not going to survive. Things are going to be destroyed. And it seems like a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, these cycles seem to be recorded often too, so they probably did happen. And again, the haves and the have-nots, right? Maybe some people did survive it. Maybe some people flourished from it, but whatever was left over, at least among the people, was strife and depression and anxiety and fear and distrust and just worlds falling apart. And just imagine the world that comes after that, generation after generation after generation. We don't need reptilians. We just need, something horrible to happen to us. But what you were saying before kind of reminded me, I wanted to talk a little bit about Atlantis, because Atlantis is a great example of what we've been talking about, how we look at it And there's billions of stories out there, mostly from channelers. Originally, as you say, we're just still talking about shit from Edgar Casey and people like that from decades and decades ago. But Atlantis is interesting because the perspective on it is crystal palaces and crazy technology. And it's literally the perfect analogy for our modern civilization falling and stuff like that. People love to use that, and they rope in the aliens, they rope in the crazy amounts of telepathy and moving things with your mind. They just rope in the most extreme. They're going to 10 immediately with all of them, and that's when, or that's where I really like to just bring up the Bok Saga or Wainamoinen mythology's perspective on Atlantis, because it claims that this word Atlantis comes from alt lant is, which is the old Swedish way of saying all land ice. And they have all these stories, not just the Bok Saga, but there's many sagas from the northern lands that talk about some sort of civilization up there in the north, thriving, but cut off and decimated by an ice age that had happened. We're probably talking about the Younger Dryas or something like that. But the perspective on it is that it was humans desperately surviving during an ice time and cut off from the majority of the southern hemisphere and some of the north. And so it's in multiple stories. And I have a Telegram called Bok Saga English. People can find it and ask as many questions as they want. The reason why I'm attracted to the Bok Saga at all is because it's the only alternative theory outside of mainstream that I've found that claims we were all human beings during all of these times of gods and aliens and stuff like that. It has a quote unquote logical explanation for early humanity. And, you don't even really have to. I mean, I don't wholeheartedly believe it either. It's the fact that it's out there. And once again, it's like the least most popular topic when it comes to ancient history in the alternative world. We don't talk about this kind of stuff if it's boring or mundane, if it's just more of us,
Well, it's interesting that so pretty much a breakaway civilization just kind of lived alongside. I mean, and that's a highly plausible explanation. I remember, have you ever seen Inside Job on Netflix? It's like a conspiracy cartoon that's like a comedy or whatever.
Yeah, it's feeding everyone the most famous conspiracies. And
It's really
like,
funny.
they're telling us.
I love it. I think it's hilarious.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's funny.
Some people don't like it because they think they're making fun of them, but I mean, they
Right.
are, but it's in a really funny way. But something that was really interesting in there is the concept that they bring up is that they keep referring to, we don't want to piss off the Atlanteans. We don't want to make the Atlanteans mad because they own a section of the planet and they're like this breakaway civilization on the planet that has their own little congregation of people that nobody knows about.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds closest to the truth in my opinion.
And it's very fascinating. It's a very interesting concept. I mean, we kind of have that right now in like that we know about. So it's not out of that, like the people in the Amazon, the tribes in the Amazon that has never had any contact with the outside world. And then we also have the cargo cults during the Vietnam War that had never seen anything from the outside world. They'd never seen any of the modern day technology that we had during that time. They'd never seen a plane, a helicopter. So whenever, our military from the United States showed up, and they thought that this man was a god because they were bringing him goods. They were bringing him all this, food and supplies. And they started worshiping this guy, this military nobody from the United States and called him a god. It's the cult of John Frum. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that has been something that has occurred. If that can occur in modern times now, how many other times has that occurred throughout history where just a slightly more advanced group of people have been developing their things separately from everybody else, and they come in and is like considered like magic, and they're considered like gods.
Yeah, like they show up and save people from a massive flood. I mean, we have the flood stories are everywhere, and we have all these stories of people coming. Here's another fun way to word things: coming out of the heavens or down from the heavens. When you really look into that word, in ancient times, they referred to the north as heaven, or the beyond, or the great beyond, the great dark wind. There's all these different names for beyond the snow region that no one could reach. In Bach Saga, beyond that snow region for thousands of years, when everybody called it that, there were people living up there that no one fucking knew about, supposedly. But I mean, again, it's echoed through so many different cultures. And it's like, if you want, I have no problem with comparative mythology. I think that's important. People that write it off as just coincidences, that's pretty ridiculous in my opinion. But jumping to it has to be aliens, or gods used to exist that came out of other dimensions called heaven and hell and things like that. That's when what's the point? Like, to entertain yourself, to ask what ifs that might be fun. I mean, and I'm talking to the most casual conspiracy theorist or the most pious person on the planet. We're all entertaining human stories about things that none of us have ever experienced. No one has ever died and come back. Well, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say that when it comes to near-death experiencers, but I don't know, man. No one's ever died and come back, So until then, why would you just believe anyone's story about what happens outside of your consciousness? It's almost so logical. It's hard for people to grasp.
It is. And then when you think of like these ancient civilizations too, and because coming out of heaven could also mean just coming out of the sky. They could have had freaking helicopters back then, or they could have had planes, and those were described as like chariots coming out of the sky when it was really a helicopter. I mean, a lot of the descriptions of them, say that they create a really loud noise, like that is really what is really loud that we know of in modern times. A freaking helicopter,
for sure.
Loud as shit.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't dispute it. Maybe that is the case. But I do like what you said earlier, that they probably didn't have the same even evolutionary or technological path as that we did. But that doesn't mean they couldn't have made some sort of machinery. But what another interesting point about those ancient accounts, for instance, Vimana, when you look into Vimana, the concept of Vimana having anything to do with flying crafts is from like the early 1900s and actually does not date back to the ancient Hindu texts. The Hindu texts that they're referring to, it's almost like, it's like Sitchin translating, because that word Vimana refers to like extremely tall towers and things like that, like big, huge buildings of worship and other reasons. But they're structures for sure. But the idea of them flying, I've seen a lot of dispute against that idea, that it's not even an ancient concept. It's actually like put in, just like Sitchin put so much into Sumerian cuneiform.
Oh man, you're gonna make a lot of people mad with that one, dude. The Vimanas aren't even real, dude. Come on, bro.
Yeah, again, what I like to do is I like to keep an open mind about aliens and everything else, but keep your damn hands off our ancient history, of our ancestors' stories. You know what I mean? Because I don't even think, I don't know, man. Like the ancient tribes today around the world that have still kind of held on to their old ways, they'll tell these stories, but it's us that are interpreting them in a certain way. You know what I mean? They're talking about light beings and tall ones and all these things, but again, every one of these tales has a counterpart argument for humanity. I urge people to look into archaeologists and anthropologists from the 1700s and the 1600s, because you're going to find that words don't mean the same thing anymore. Words that had very down to earth meanings have taken quite a fancy flight since, mainly since the mid 1800s, where folklore became very popular. Men like George MacDonald, who were predecessors of C.S. Lewis and people like that, he coined the supernatural term portal. Until 1856 or whatever it was, there was not a single mention of that word having anything to do with anything supernatural. It was strictly a word that was used in nautical terminology and about ships and coming off of docks and things like that. It never had any supernatural connection until an Englishman put it to it in modern literature. So a lot of these terms, we just think they're so ancient because the concepts from ancient cultures may seem similar, but we're literally just linking things that I wouldn't say aren't there, but it's kind of, they're put there to be found.
Yeah, that's kind of like what we were mentioning earlier, and we don't know what these people referred to as these different words. I mean, the words, like you're saying, probably meant something completely different than what they mean to this very day. I mean, the whole term flying saucer was a sport in
Right.
the late 1800s. It was a sport called flying saucers, where they would create these discs. They would throw the disc up in the sky and shoot them for like target practice, which is called trap shooting.
Yep.
And then during World War II, whenever the military adopted the term to train the Air Force for World War II, and the war ended in 1945, and then 2 years later, we see the reemergence of the term, but under a completely different context.
Absolutely.
But it had been in the consciousness of everyone since 1880. Everyone knew the term flying saucer.
Mm-hmm. And then it just suddenly was accepted as something new.
Yep.
It just happens over and over again, man. Like when people are standing in it or thinking that they're conjuring fairies, or they're standing in a fairy circle. Like the original fairy circles were the round table courts used in, the royal picks would sit at these round table courts, and they'd be known as the fair circles. We get this term fair and fairy from ancient Greek, and it just means noble or royal. And that's the reoccurring theme. We continuously find nobility and royalty in a lot of these words that were used a long time ago. I looked into the etymology of elven and elf, and I found the word white and shining. And at first I'm like, oh God, this sounds racist. But it goes beyond that. It may be northern people, but at the same time, it stood for nobility and righteousness and royalty and things like that. My favorite example, forgive me if I shared this on our last encounter, but there's the Smith map from like 16 something. And on the Smith map, there's a picture of a Susquehanna man, and he's huge and he looks almost like a Sasquatch. And what is written about this man is that the Susquehanna are a giant people. Therefore, they are attired. And so when I look at that through modern eyes, it's hard to make any sort of logical sense out of that. Okay, so they were giants, so therefore they wore clothes. What does that doesn't make any sense. Of course they wore clothes. They can be small or big. You can wear clothes. What does giant have to do with clothing? Well, then you have to look at the origin of the word attire, because it didn't just mean clothing. It meant dressed in lavish garments reserved for royalty. So when that man Smith says that that they were a giant people, thus they were attired, he's literally saying they were royalty, so they were dressed as such. And one last point about that is that there's a modern Netflix show all about the Viking gods, and it's depicted as if it's just human beings instilled with this, phenomenological energy of some sort that kind of puts them in tune with Thor and the giants, right? The giants were always against the gods. And these gods in the show are just rich assholes. That's all they are. They're nobility among the people around the area, good and bad, from family member to family member. But they're the giants. They're the gods. You know what I mean?
It's kind of like, I think it was it Iron Man 3 with Robert Downey Jr., where they hyped up the Mandarin character as like this mystical, like all knowing, all badass guy that has these mystical rings or whatever. And then Iron Man like goes to confront him and he's like, I'm just an actor, bro. Like,
yeah, Ben Kingsley's just like, I'm a patsy. Yeah, that was great. It's a great thing. It's like have you ever seen the movie Big Fish by Tim Burton?
No, I haven't. What's it about?
It's a great movie. It's about a man who's kind of distanced from his father over time, and he finally gets to see him again, and his father's kind of dying, and his father's always told these tall tales, these big crazy stories that include giants and magical things happening and all these amazing stories. And you're taken back through his memories, and things are crazy, and there's this giant that befriends him, and he's like 12, 16 feet tall or something like that. All these amazing things are happening. And then his father dies. And sorry, I'm ruining like a 2007 movie. But so he dies, and at the funeral, all these old friends, all these people and characters from this man's past show up to the funeral. And you see the giant have trouble getting out of the car, and he's helped by another man. And he's about 7.5 feet tall, and he has a disease where his bones grew. You know, it's the real giants that we know of, right? All these different little stories have their human interpretation laid down upon them again. And the son, who's just always thought of his father as a liar and an exaggerator, he just has this beautiful moment where he realizes who his dad was and the stories he was telling and how he was able to enrich his son with these fables, these moral stories in a much easier way for children to understand. And it just, yeah, you see the relief and the sadness and the happiness go over his face. And that's kind of what has happened to me over time with these topics, because it really, you take all these provocative ideas, the ones that can scare the fuck out of you or the ones that lead you on, and you just reduce them all back down to what you have within you and what you've learned from each other on a very human level.
Well, a good story never dies, and we've always been storytellers. Like, that's our nature,
Yeah, right.
to tell amazing stories. You can never kill a story.
Absolutely. And there's nothing new under the sun. So yeah, we have our same stories over and over again. And perhaps it's the hero's journey, the hero's adventure, like Joseph Campbell talks about. And I think that's important to all of us in some way or another, because the first one is ourselves, and it's in our head, you know, the journey we're taking. And so we have to relate.
Absolutely. It's so difficult to destroy and wreck a story, because the story is a creation.
Absolutely.
It's your own creation. And when a lot of people believe in that creation, there's nothing that you can do to it. It's pretty much invincible. It's impenetrable. Can't get in there.
And you know,
no matter how hard you can have people in court depositions saying that they made everything up, it does not matter. The story will continue, and people will continue to keep talking about it, right?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, well said.
I have this clip that I wanted to show earlier, but I kind of forgot about it. It's of Barack Obama. He's talking about the dis and misinformation from, I believe that it is, where is it from? Oh, Stanford. It's from Stanford University in 2022, I think. And I've played it on my show before, but I think it bears repeating, because he's essentially saying that the conspiracies and stuff are used for an agenda, and it's pretty much everything is all culminating. Everything that we've talked about so far is all really culminating to what Obama is talking about here in 2022. But just for before I play the clip, this is fair use under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, education, and research. And that is what me and Andy are going to be doing here today. Instead of talking about what Barack Obama said in 2022, we are going to listen to the man himself say it so we don't misquote him or get anything wrong. All right, here it is.
Understand, it's not necessary for people to believe this information in order to weaken democratic institutions.
And a reminder to YouTube that we are commenting over this video and it is covered under fair use.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.
How profound is that, Andy?
He sounds like Yuri Bezmenov or whatever his name is, the Russian disinfo agent. He's saying the same things. And the thing is he's talking about himself and all of his friends. He probably blames this on Russia, right? Which Russia's probably doing worse shit.
Yeah, but it's kind of besides the point. Whatever anybody thinks about Barack Obama, who cares? Studying what he's saying in this clip, because I think it's really profound. But I agree with you. He's probably not taking it in the same way that we're taking it. It's probably some other country or some other thing that he's talking about here.
But it is. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
For who, though? You know, it's not the right, it's not the left. You know, these are convenient straw men, where whoever they are. You know, it's an interesting one because he hits the nail on the head. It's exactly the tactic. It's exactly what Yuri was saying about the Cold War and everything. And they did, you know, Obama. The claim is that 2012 repeal of the Smith-Mundt Act was like they're allowed to show us what they've been using on other countries as propaganda. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I think it's more like they've been spreading all kinds of propaganda towards us the whole damn time.
Yeah, it's just interesting the way that he describes it, and you're right. It's almost identical to what Yuri Bezmenov said about four. What did he say? 4 steps to subvert an entire country, which is destabilization, demoralization, crisis, and then normalization.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what we see. And we see it happening on many different scales. Like, you know, the mainstream masses that the conspiracy theorists are all trying to save and wake up. It's happening to the masses, but it's also happening to the conspiracy theorists. And it really sucks because, you know, a lot of people will go through both of those lifestyles and eventually come out kind of in the middle with nothing to say. And like, well, I was fooled on both ends of it. I have no idea what to think anymore, you know, and
then they
I think
revert
that's
back
where
to
they
Christianity.
want that too, big time, because it's safe. And again, I don't even like necessarily disagree with the spiritual premise behind Christianity, that there's something beyond this, but we don't fucking know. And to just trust man's words, the old world order's words over, you know, like, why would you do that? You know?
Yeah, it's just interesting that what he's basically saying is that the conspiracy theories, the myths and disinformation is controlled, that it's a part of the plan, that is put out there on purpose and done on purpose to cause confusion. Is
Absolutely.
essentially exactly what he's saying.
And that doesn't mean it's all bullshit either, because they have to lure us in with things that matter. They really do. And they know that some of us are really smart. They're not just going to fool everybody, you know? They don't have to.
They don't, because then it's like it's kind of a self-governing system. The people will call out other people. I mean, we see this all the time when someone is so much behind one certain individual, and then someone comes out against them, and then they just go on the attack.
Right.
It's attack.
Absolutely.
And it's always the same thing. It's always, you're an agent. You're working for the CIA. You're working for the cabal. You're a disinformationalist. You're a like, for what, bro? For what?
Well, that especially in this community with the UFOs, it's really hard for the people that, because I've seen people argue with you and call you those things, and I've been called those things. And it's funny because it's like, dude, are you kidding me? You guys trust the government. Like, what are you talking? You trust what fucking military officials say? Like, are you kidding me? It's it's such a weird situation. Like,
and the same thing is used, but in a different way for the spiritual community, right? But it's the same type of thing. It's, oh, you're working for the dark side. Oh, you're working for the Luciferians. You're working for Satan.
Like, dude, you're working for the church, the murderous, burn the world down church.
or you're the breakaway Galactic Federation,
right?
You're breaking away from the Galactic Federation of Light. You're now a part of the Galactic Federation of Dark.
Yeah, and nobody wants to talk about shadows. You know, nobody wants to address their shadow. They just want to fucking have it live out against their will the rest of their lives because they think it's evil to look in dark corners.
Yeah, and not do any real work and kind of just leap over everything and then just get directly to the top, to enlightenment, right? They want a quick way, cutting corners of the way to get to enlightenment as quick as possible.
You know, I saw something on Twitter today from Dr. Stephen Greer, and I found it really weird because it's usually not the position he takes, at least not without saying a hell of a lot more wacko shit. But he said the entity which controls the UFO matter has more power than any single government in the world or any single identified world leader. This cabal is a hybrid, quasi-government, quasi-privatized operation, which is international and functions outside of the purview of any single agency or any single government. And I'm like, well, shit, Stephen, I kind of would agree with you there. But I have a feeling that this must have been a clipped quote or something where he goes off and says, but then the aliens, because I mean, he's always played both sides in a way. You know, he says a lot of this stuff, but then he also has his CE5 business, which makes millions a year, you know?
Yeah, I kind of teeter back and forth on Stephen Greer. I think that he realizes or knows that all the craft are military craft, but he can't come out and say that it's all. I mean, he can. I mean, I do. I say it all the time, but no one cares because I'm too small, right? It's like what I was talking about before. You can have dissenting opinions and go against everybody when nobody listens to you, right? Or you're a very small channel, but if you're not, you kind of have to toe the line.
Yeah, the wrong person starts listening to me, I'm going to be quiet and take my wife and son somewhere very quiet. You know? I'm not going to deny that. You know, I'm not going to die for country.
Right, but I've always, Greer said some interesting things over the years. He was one of the first people to, one of the first big people to come out and say, you know, the My Lab abductions, that a lot of these abductions are done by the military, which I always found that is pretty credible, because a lot of the people that claim UFO and alien abductions, they just kind of track that back in their mind and they realize that, oh, I'm not in outer space. I'm not on a spaceship. I'm in a freaking military base.
Right.
And there's military officers around me.
I'm paranoid. I look at Greer's statements like that and I'm like, is there an ulterior motive? Is this a way to make realistic the real UFOs from aliens? You're like, oh yeah, some of it's mankind. Oh yeah, for sure. It's kind of like dampening it. It's being a more convincing liar. I mean, do I even want to know why or if it's true that he meets with all these fucking military and government personnel for the past like 30 years? Why? Because he's an orthopedic surgeon? Like, why did this guy get connections to these people in the first place? One, is it real? I think it is, because look at the fucking hearings he's been able to put together. So two, why are we listening to a goddamn thing this guy's saying? Or I should take that back. Listen very carefully to what he's saying, obviously, because I think if he's got those kind of connections, he's compromised, in my opinion. Or, yeah, I think he's compromised.
Well, and he talks about the exact same things in every one of his documentaries. Like, it's the exact same things. He doesn't differ or change really anything. It's like, oh, I got a brand new documentary coming out with all new, brand new information. We're going to talk about free energy this time. And then it's literally a repeat of the exact same thing that he talked about before.
And a few crying scenes, a little tiny doll. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, well, that's not just him either, right? Like I'm saying, everybody seems to be getting to the same damn conclusions. Whether it's crazy ass Tim Burchett from Texas talking about how demons are aliens, oh my god, tarnation, or Rogan having Carlson and Billy Carson on talking about the same thing. We're all being led towards a very specific narrative. Whether you're Joe Schmo who works in an office and watches sports at night and doesn't give a shit about UFOs, or if you're one of us, or if you're one of the UFO pious, or if you're a very religious person and you think the world is coming to an end and, oh my God, geez, my religion is starting to show its answers in the real world and the government's talking about it. All of these angles are controlled. And it's all these different sheepdogs bringing us all towards the same pen. What is that pen? I don't really know. Do they think they're going to be able to just close the book and have us at their whims forever? I don't really know what the motive is. I'm just trying to observe what I see and patterns that I see, you know?
Absolutely. I agree a lot, Andy. And I think that's a good place to wrap it up. And
Sure.
Thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate your time this evening. Wonderful conversation. Can you let people know where they can find you online? Do you have a YouTube channel?
Hell yeah, man. Just search for the Deep Share podcast on YouTube. It's been a while. I've been in hiding. I haven't done an episode since like early March. So I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, you can find me on YouTube. You can find the Deep Share podcast on any podcast app that's out there. I'm on Odysee as well. And yeah, come chat with me on Twitter or X or Instagram. You can find me at the Deep Share on there, just being very loud and opinionated. So thank you, man.
Well, you're welcome on here anytime, my friend. And hopefully this gives you the energy and the drive to kick back up your shows, my friend. And I hope to see more of you. You're a good dude, and looking forward to what you bring to the table, because we can't give up, dude. We can't let these freaking people win, bro. We got to bring dissenting opinions everywhere.
Damn right.
All right, guys,
Great
the links
to see
to
you,
Andy's information will be in the description of this video. Thanks, everyone, being here in the chat. Really appreciate each and every single one of you. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel in the algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. And we'll see you guys next time.